Hello everyone, this is Michael from Blue Road Home Studio. It is late in the day, it's the waning days of summer, and I'm here in the North Garden to give you your weekend music production tip. So this tip is all about Aftertouch as it pertains to Midi keyboard controllers. This is something I see pop up in the forums a lot, people asking what exactly Aftertouch is, and if you're a non-keyboard player, this is something good to understand. So what is Aftertouch exactly? I'm going to explain this in detail and you will see examples of it, but just to start, pretend my hand here is a keyboard. When you press down on one of the keys, a note will sound. And if you keep holding that key down and then you apply some extra pressure to it, then depending on the instrument you have or the sample you have, it will actually change that sound. So it will evolve the sound a little. It depends on what sample you're using or what instrument you're using. But say you're using a synth pad, and when you press down, you hear that synth sound. So I'm just hitting a single note and I just get a nice synth pad. But then I apply some extra pressure. Okay, that's called Aftertouch. It's just adding extra pressure to the note. So I'm pushing down harder, then it evolves the sound a little bit. So this all depends on the programming of whatever synth sound you might be using or whatever software instrument you might be using. So a lot of times they will layer sounds in a single sample, and those extra sounds will get triggered as you press that note harder. So let's go into my studio and let's look at a couple of examples of this. So what I have here is just a classical piano, and it's from the Logic sampler. Okay, it's just the standard classical piano. Now, Aftertouch on a piano sample is not really going to do anything, but I just want you to see how the MIDI data is recorded. The Aftertouch MIDI data is actually recorded on the track. So I'm just going to hit middle C, and then I'm going to keep my finger down on the middle C, and I'm just going to apply varying degrees of pressure, and you'll see what happens. So I'm just going to hit record, hit middle C, applying pressure, more pressure, a little less pressure. You see those little lines? More pressure, less pressure, more pressure, and you get the point. Now I'll just take my finger off the keyboard. Okay, so in Logic, and I have this track really enlarged so that you can actually see what's happening here. In Logic, these lines represent MIDI data that has been recorded or automated. Sometimes you might see these lines and be like, hey, I haven't used any modulation, or I haven't used a pitch bend or anything. Why are there these lines? Well, it's probably because your keyboard has Aftertouch and you were maybe varying some pressure on your keyboard. Let's double click on the track to go into the piano roll, and there you can see it's one long note. Okay, so I never took my finger off the note. Now if, let me enlarge this a little bit here so you can see. Now if we select automation so that we can see the automation lanes, you'll see here is my note velocity, right? It's just kind of one long note. I was holding down the note. But now down here at the bottom, if I click, a big menu comes up, okay? And you can see some of the MIDI parameters that you can control. But if you go down to the bottom here, you will always see whatever MIDI data has been written onto that track. So in this case, I know that note velocity was written. That's a given default because when you hit the note, you're going to have note velocity. But then you can see Aftertouch, and I'll select Aftertouch here, and you can see what I was doing. So there was the initial hit, and then I kind of released the note a little bit, and then I added pressure to the note a little bit, and then I kind of took some pressure away, added pressure, and you can see that this kind of coincides. If I make the top view a little longer and try to even it out here. So now, let me make it smaller. Okay. So here you can see the start of the note. There's the Aftertouch where I'm releasing some pressure. And in this case, I probably released a little too much pressure because it went all the way to 0, which would mean I'm not actually contacting the note. But you can follow it along. So here I have pressure added. Here I'm taking it away. And you can see where these little lines kind of represent the changes here in the MIDI data. So that, in essence, is what Aftertouch will look like as it is automated or as you have recorded it using your various pressure sensitivities. So now that we see that if you push down harder on your key, there's some extra Midi data that gets recorded in there, and that's all dependent on the sample. Now, of course, with the piano, you're not going to hear that because the piano doesn't really have an aftertouch layer put into it. You know, it's just a normal piano sound. But let's look at a couple sounds now, or a couple presets in Omnisphere that have this aftertouch kind of built into the overall programming of the sound, and you'll hear what happens. So for this, again, I have a very large instrument track here so you can kind of see what's happening, but I am going to be using a preset in Omnisphere, okay? And this is a patch or a preset called Sacred Shrine. As I play this, you're going to hear the sound change. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just play a C note here, okay? And I'm going to press the C note down, but I'm going to keep holding the C note down, and I'm going to then apply more pressure. And you're going to hear, as I apply more pressure, how this sample changes, how this sound changes, how it evolves, okay? Get ready. Here we go. Now, do you hear how the sound is relatively smooth? Watch what happens when I apply more pressure to it. I'm going to apply more pressure right now. Hear how it becomes more jittery? Take it off. Less pressure, more pressure. Hear how it almost has that kind of almost a helicopter effect? That's me pressing down harder on the note, and then releasing, it gets smoother. Let's take a look at another one. This one's even more prominent. Okay, so once again, I'm going to use Omnisphere for this, and I'll just show you what this is. This is a bass patch in Trillion. This is going to be a great example of Aftertouch. So let me go ahead and I'll just record, and you'll hear what happens. So kind of weird, I know, but you could use that in some type of sound design scenario or in some kind of musical scenario easily. So Aftertouch can be used in those types of examples. Sometimes if you have software instruments that can layer multiple synths, you can apply Aftertouch so that when you apply the Aftertouch, other layers of other synths come in. A lot of times it'll be used for just volume control. And sometimes even in orchestral libraries, you can use it for various functions as well, like vibrato. Say on a violin patch to maybe add some vibrato. So as you actually push down the note harder, add pressure, Aftertouch, you will get vibrato. I don't tend to do this too much in orchestral libraries. I usually assign vibrato to a fader or a control knob because I feel like I get a little better control. Take this example, for instance. Now, for this example, I'm not going to use Aftertouch. Aftertouch, though, sometimes can be used in certain libraries to add vibrato to an instrument. So here I have the BBC Symphony Orchestra set up, and I just have a violin leader, so kind of a solo violin, and I have it set to just a long sample. Now, if I go over into the effects, there's vibrato. So if I put it at 100% and I don't do anything and I just press the note, a vibrato is going to gently come in. Okay, if I had this set to Aftertouch, which I don't. And you can't actually set this to Aftertouch in this particular library. You can't set vibrato to Aftertouch. But if I were, say, holding down a note, and then I put more pressure, and I could use Aftertouch, this is what would happen. So I'm going to put pressure down, theoretically. Take pressure off, and then the vibrato goes down. But for most libraries these days, I will just put this on a separate controller. So I'll right-click Learn MIDI Automation. I'll put this on one of my knobs on my actual keyboard controllers. And I just feel like you get a smoother control doing that. Some libraries do allow you to do this with Aftertouch. I generally don't use Aftertouch for vibratos. I find that you just get better control depending on the sample with when you actually learn the MIDI to a certain knob on your keyboard, or a fader on your MIDI controller. So actually the fader is ideal because you get a lot of control that way. Now, not all MIDI keyboards and MIDI controllers have Aftertouch. I would say the majority of them do, but if you're thinking about buying a new MIDI controller, you may want to look and see if it actually has Aftertouch. Some do, some don't. The majority will, but you can see how it can come in pretty handy. But remember, Aftertouch also, it really depends on the particular sample you're using or the particular sound that you're using in a virtual instrument. So it all depends on what's programmed into that sound. Some of you might remember I did a video a while ago on Midi 2.0 and some of the possible implications that it could have on music making. And I think Aftertouch will have some kind of advancement with Midi 2.0 as that rolls out more. Now, basically everything I said in this video hasn't really happened yet. It's all hypothetical stuff, but Aftertouch could be one of those things where you might see some extra MIDI function from Midi 2.0. So you can check that video out if you want. Now, I usually like to give you some music listening for the weekend, but I don't really have any examples of music listening that involves Aftertouch. You probably never know. So I say for this weekend, just go, have some fun, listen to whatever you want. Lately, I've been listening to an album called Cityscape. It's a jazz saxophone album, and it's a really wonderful album by Michael Brecker and Klaus Augerman. And take a listen to it, especially if you're driving around a city at night. You can see why a saxophone really gives you that feeling of being in a city. So maybe listen to that this weekend. Have a great weekend, everyone. I will be back next weekend with another weekend music production tip. If this tip helped you, please subscribe to my channel and please give it a like. You can always ring that bell for future notifications of whenever I release new videos. And as always, keep being creative and keep producing music.